Hi, Tim.
Morning. How you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
No problem at all. Nice, good to be with you.
Can you explain to me a little bit about your great grandfather and what makes him special?
Okay, yeah, his story's very different, really, to many stories that you'll hear as far as the First World War is concerned, because William said he'd go to war, but he refused to fight. Now, he wasn't a conscientious objector. Many people think he was, but he wasn't. But he made that decision because of his faith. He was a Christian. He believed in God, believed the Bible, believed Jesus died on a cross. And he said, because of all of that, he said, I'll go to war, but I refuse to fight. So he then was able to choose his path as a stretcher bearer, which is quite an unusual thing to be able to do. And stretcher bearers sort of went around in groups of 4 or 6 to carry the bodies back. But again, William did something unusual in the fact that he said, when I go onto the front line, he said, I'm not even going to take a stretcher with me. He said, if I take a stretcher with me as a stretcher bearer, I need at least one other person to carry the other end of that stretcher. And he said, that puts his life at risk. So he said, I'll go alone and I'll carry the soldiers back. So with all of these little unusual things, the other thing we need to keep in mind is that of his height, he was only 5'4". You know, you had to be 5'3" to be in the British Army in the First World War. He was only 5'4", so very small man. And then as a result of that, as a result of all of his actions that we could talk about, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest award. He was awarded the DCM, the Distinguished Conduct Medal, twice. He was awarded the Military Medal twice, and a number of other medals as well. Now, as a result of that, he's now described as the highest decorated non-commissioned officer in the British Army. Yeah, the story is quite an unusual story, and that's what I spend majority of my time traveling the UK talking about, really.
Just for people who don't know, the Victoria Cross is the highest military award that you can receive. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And when it's quite an interesting story behind the medal, actually. Queen Victoria, when she commissioned the medal, the whole point of the medal, as far as she was concerned, that it was to be the highest award for any soldier. But the medal itself, she said, she wanted it to be completely worthless because it was the deed that was done that was the most important thing. So as a result of that, when she got her staff to go around the jewellers in London to try and commission the medal, you could just imagine the jewellers rubbing their hands. Oh, the highest award, it's going to be made out of gold then, surely. And they said, no. Well, bronze then, or silver or platinum. But they said, no. Well, what do you want it made out of then? Well, bronze. Well, we're not interested then. And so they went around all the jewellers in London. None of them were interested until they came to one called Hancocks, who had only been in business 3 or 4 years, and they commissioned the medal. So to make a medal, a Victoria Cross today would probably cost about £60. But to buy a Victoria Cross today, you're probably looking, the value of it would probably between £250,000 to £500,000, just the one medal. And initially made out of bronze, but then made out of Crimean cannons. So yeah, it was. The other different thing about William was that he was never, and this is the crazy thing from my point of view, is he was never interested in the attention that he got as a result of what he did. I don't know, because he died the year I was born, so I never met him. So I was only 3 months old when he died. So he had a full military funeral. Soldiers lined the streets of the village, and on one of the pictures of the funeral is the soldiers lining the streets, and there's a pram on the corner, and I was in that pram. So he never wanted the attention. He very rarely went to any events to commemorate his achievements or anything like that. And that's why it's crazy that I'm doing what I'm doing. I travel the UK pretty much, going to all different groups. I was in Redditch last night doing a Women's Institute, doing the presentation on his life, presentation which lasts about 45 minutes. And the crazy thing about that is that years ago, over the years, although we knew he'd been awarded the medals, when any event was put on, and the family were always invited, I was the one person in the family that never went. Because I was always of the opinion, well, if William didn't want the attention for what he did, why should we give it now? He didn't want it, why should we give it now? That changed about 10, 11 years ago now. A friend of mine there was a book written on William's life, which now looks like that, which is available, I've got. And when my friend read that book, he went into a lot of schools in Scotland and he said, this story is amazing and it needs to be told. the next generation need to know. So I said, fair enough. So he did it up in Scotland. He had part of a presentation put together professionally. He gave me that. And then I put a lot of family stuff to it. And I was asked to do it in a school down here. And then I was asked to do it in a WI, Women's Institute. And that started 11 years ago. Now, every time I did a presentation, it was like a pebble going into a pond. People would hear about it, tell other people, and then I would get asked to go here, there, and everywhere. And that's pretty much what I do full time, apart from going into schools, doing assemblies as well, and other church stuff. But that's probably one of the main things I do, is just literally go all over the UK to all different kinds of groups, so WIs and Probus groups, Rotary clubs, U3A groups, historical societies, schools, just telling the story of William, because it's such an unusual story. And people have likened it to, I don't know whether you saw the film Hacksaw Ridge a few years ago. Second World War American guy who did a very similar thing to William. And so this is, people always say, oh, it's a very similar story. Well, it is a very similar story. And there's a lot of things around the area that have been done to commemorate his life. So, yeah, it's pretty unusual thing, but it's really, I find it really interesting. And we keep learning about William as well as to what he did and what he achieved.
What do you think the qualities are of your great-grandfather that made him achieve these incredible feats, going against all wisdom, really, all kind of self-preservation kind of thinking, going into extremely dangerous situations to rescue people? What was it that made him do that? Was it just his faith?
I think his faith was a massive part. He knew whatever happened, because he was a Christian, that if he didn't come back, he'd be in heaven anyway. So, and I think there's also an element of, I've often thought, I wonder whether he would have been embarrassed by what he was awarded to a certain degree, because of the kind of man he was. He was a very quiet, humble man. Did he look at the situation and think, well, I just did what thousands of others did. I went to war, I did my job, I came home. And maybe he wouldn't have looked at it like we're looking at it now. He was just another guy with thousands of others who left their family, left their home, not knowing what was going to happen, and just did their job. He was very fortunate in the fact he wasn't even injured at war, and he was allowed to come home and to his family. He'd left a wife, he left a little child at home to go to war. Went to war in his early 20s, 23, 24, I think he was when he went. Lived to be in his 80s, but his faith would have played a massive part, and played a massive part from a boy right till the time he died, because his church life was important to him right till the time he died. So yeah, that would have been a massive part of his decision to go and to do what he did.
When you give these talks, what are the most common questions? Like, do people say, I never knew that story, or of your great-grandfather?
One of the things that I say in the talk is the fact that majority of people have never heard of him. And somebody once said that he's probably one of the most decorated men that people have never heard of. And I think even in Burton, okay, it's probably more so now, more known now, because of the amount of things that are around the town. He's often mentioned in the paper. And there was a historian in the town who used to write a column in the paper. And once he was asked, who would you like to sit and have a meal with? And he mentioned a number of people, but one of the people he wanted to sit and have a meal with was William Coltman. He said, but as long as he was in a talkative mood, because, these guys that came back from war didn't talk about their experiences. My dad knew William for 28 years, and until the book was written 15 or 16 years ago, he didn't know hardly any of those things. And in fact, when he read the book, he said to me afterwards, my dad said to me afterwards, he said it was like reading about a stranger. Well, that was his granddad, and that was just typical of that generation. They just didn't talk about it. The First World War was so horrific. Why would you want to talk about it? Why would you want to go over it? It was a case of shut the door. That's gone. That's finished. Move on. So yeah, it was a remarkable sort of situation, really, that we can talk about.
It's almost a miracle. Not only did he achieve all those incredible feats, saving soldiers, but he didn't get harmed. You
Yeah.
can only imagine the sort of danger he would put himself in, and it's almost like he was. Well, I don't know. It is like a miracle in that way, isn't it? That he didn't get hurt
And
or
often
injured.
people say, the only explanation is that God was looking after him, and I think that's probably right. That is the explanation. Even when you think of, in the presentation we talk about the citation, which is left on record in the army for why he was awarded the Victoria Cross, and one of the things he did to be awarded the Victoria Cross was, it says in the citation, he went forward alone in the face of fierce enfilade fire. Enfilade fire is if the Germans would be lying both sides, and crossfire coming in at an angle all the way down. And he went straight through the middle of that on 3 occasions over a period of 48 hours without rest, and got one or more seriously injured soldiers and brought them all back, and they all survived. Now, to do that and not to get even, the only thing we know that happened to him was he was gassed once and removed off the front line for, I think, 2 to 3 weeks. As far as I'm aware, as far as all the stuff we read, that's the only thing that happened to him, which is crazy.
I wonder what the odds are of William doing all that and not getting touched, not getting hurt. They must be incredible. It must be near.
Yeah.
When,
Just
when did you? When were you first aware of his legacy and his
well,
achievements?
I knew he'd been awarded the medals. I don't think until the book was written we realised the significance of what he had done. Okay, the Victoria Cross, it was a massive thing, and yeah, it was great, and we knew it was the highest award and all that kind of thing. Until I sat and read the book, and of which I've read a few times, and the more and more you think about it, I suppose the older you get, you would become to appreciate it more. But the more and more you think about it, and some of the things he did, and some of the stories I tell in the presentation, it's just unbelievable what he did. And there were times when he disobeyed orders to do certain things. There was one occasion when we were under heavy attack as far as an army were concerned, and we were told to retreat, to stay, and not to go out until a further command was given. William disobeyed that order. When darkness had fallen, he went out, and every soldier had to carry a number of things. And one of the things was the identification tags that I talk about in the presentation. So on there, 2 tags, your name, your rank, and your regiment on there, the dog tags we now call them. And he went out, and every time he came across a dead body of a soldier, he removed the bottom part of the tag, still leaving identification on them, but removing that. Taking that off the soldier, returning it to the army returned it to the government, and the family in this country. The reason he did that was because the family in this country would have got a payout from the government for their soldier dying in action, but they needed proof. They needed either a tag or a pay book off the body. So that's why he went out doing that, against all orders. Now, because he did that, he disobeyed orders, but he was awarded a medal for it, which is crazy. He was awarded the DCM, the Distinguished Conduct Medal, and that was just one occasion. There was another occasion when I talk about in the presentation the fact that the colonel came in to the trenches and spoke to him and asked him to go around and introduce him to the troops to see how morale was doing. He disobeyed that order as well, because everybody else, because it was the colonel, stood up and stood to attention and saluted him. William didn't. He just brought somebody in off the front line who was seriously injured. He didn't stand to attention. He didn't salute the colonel. He just basically put his hand back and said, listen, this man needs my help here, and there are other men on the front line who need me. He said, just get somebody else to do it. Well, the basic of that was disobeying a colonel. He could have been taken around the back and shot for that, but he didn't. Actual fact, the colonel later left on record that he said of William that he was the bravest man he'd ever met, and did more than that, because when he died, the solicitors of the colonel contacted the Coltman family to inform them that the colonel had left William £25 in his will. £25 to you and me today is probably not a lot of money, but it certainly was all those years ago. Now, these are the crazy things that you come across and that you learn and you find out about William, and you just think, disobeying orders, disobeying a colonel. There are so many things that should have gone against him, but didn't.
When I read about your about William's story, when I was looking for subjects to cover, it just stands out. It kind of leaps out the page in terms of why have I never known of this person, this individual, and his achievements. And also just what he achieved, and like you say, he did it against sometimes against the orders of his superiors, and in the line of fire, anyone else would have probably perished, with the
Yeah,
best will in the
absolutely. Yeah,
world.
yeah.
But it's just incredible. Do you think he had survivor's guilt? Do you think that's why a lot of veterans don't talk about their experiences? Do you think there's an element of guilt there, or
Maybe,
something else?
maybe. The problem we've got, of course, is like with many others, he didn't talk about it. So he never mentioned any of these things. And in fact, we learned something only just a handful of years ago about him that he was involved with, which is pretty significant, which we have to put into the presentation because it is so significant, which we could talk about in a minute. But yeah, maybe he was. But I think one of the main reasons was it was so horrific, the First World War. The more I read about it, the more I hear. And every time I do a presentation, there'll be somebody in the audience that will come to me and say a story of their family or their family member. I mean, I was down in the Cotswolds not too long ago, and one of the things I mentioned is the fact that there are a number of places in the UK that are called thankful villages. That's a village where all the people that left went to the First World War, but they all survived and all came home. So it's called a thankful village. But there are also a number of places called doubly thankful villages. So from that village, all that went to the First World War and the Second World War all survived and all came home.
Uh-huh.
So I was literally just down the road from a doubly thankful village, which a lot of people go to in the Cotswolds. It's a very famous place. I was 2 or 3 miles away in another village, but then found out about another horrific story. In that village, there was a woman, a family called, and their surname was Souls. I think they had five or six boys. 4 of them went to war, all died in the war. Her one surviving son also died following the war because of ill health. But she had to leave the village. She was hounded out of the village because she got money for her boys dying at war. And the villagers were all talking about the fact that she had more money than they had.
Yeah.
And she had to leave the village because of it. What a horrific story. And that's 2 or 3 miles from a doubly thankful village.
Yeah.
Such a massive contrast. And yet you come across these stories, and some of them are just horrific, and some of the stories that people tell you. And I think, coming back from that, they just didn't want to relive it, to try and shut it out as best you could, if you could. I'm not sure if you could.
I don't think we can comprehend, can we, what people would have seen.
No.
It probably couldn't even explain it in words. It's just
No. No, it's just horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And yeah, you'd love to be able to sit down. I'd love to be able to sit down with William and just chat to him, but would he want to talk about it? Maybe not. I sometimes think, what would he think about me going around the country telling his story? He'd probably be horrified at that, wouldn't he? Absolutely horrified. But,
I think time's a big one, a big factor in some ways, because a lot of people, it's not just the war, it's the courage and the bravery of individuals like your great grandfather. And I think that's what we were celebrating, that, he did these incredible deeds in such adverse conditions. And, it needs to be remembered that a lot of people sacrificed their sons, their daughters, their family members, and for this very war and every war that came after it. Do you think there might be a film about William, or has there ever been talk of?
I've been often asked that question. There's always a slight reluctance, as far as I'm concerned, because obviously when you make it into a film, there's a lot of embellishment going on to make it into a film.
I don't think you would have to embellish very much. There's so much.
You probably wouldn't with William, but I mean, the Hacksaw Ridge film, I think, is a brilliant film. It's a great film, and it's a very similar story. And they actually interview the actual man himself. He's died now, but at the end of the film, Desmond Doss. And I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about that. So I don't know what I would say if somebody approached us about that. I'm not sure, but yeah.
Tim, thank you for talking to me about your great grandfather. I know it's only been brief. Take care, Tim.
Good. All right. Thanks, Tony. Nice to speak to you.
Bye-bye.